Hello and welcome to Our Lewes, featuring news from Disability News Service and the Oyster Project, hosted by Sam Sinclair and John Russell, coming to you from Westgate Chapel, Lewes, East Sussex, the home of Radio Lewes. History Month launch hears of Cameron's broken promise to disabled veterans. A disabled researcher has accused the Prime Minister of breaking his promise to disabled veterans that they would not have to be assessed for the government's new disability benefit. David Cameron made headlines in July 2012 when he pledged in a speech in Kambashan in Afghanistan that seriously wounded veterans would be exempt from the controversial reforms to replace working age disability living allowance with the new personal independence payment. Veterans would only have to undergo a military assessment to determine their eligibility for help with costs associated with their injuries, and would not also have to be put through the PIP test faced by millions of other disabled people. Cameron was reported as saying the military are going to have a special set of circumstances so they can get a special deal. I intervened to make sure that happens, and I think that is one of the many ways we should respect our armed services for what they have done for us.
But researcher and campaigner Mo Stewart told this week's launch event of UK Disability History Month, which this year has a theme of war and impairment, that war pensioners had assumed that all disabled veterans would be exempt and retain access to disability living allowance. But she said it had now been confirmed that Cameron's promise only applied to modern veterans, all those given an award under the Armed Forces Compensation Scheme, which replaced the War Pension Scheme in 2005. This means that about 80,000 working-age war pensioners currently claiming disability living allowance will eventually have to be reassessed for PIP and will risk losing some or all of their benefits.
Stewart received a call from a civil servant in the Cabinet Office last year confirming that all war pensioners could keep their DLA for life and will not be reassessed as an acknowledgement of their service to the nation. But she has now been told by the Ministry of Defence that the new scheme and the new Armed Forces Independence payment, introduced in April 2013, is not applicable to recipients of the War Pension Scheme. Stewart said this would be a death sentence for many working-age veterans who would not be able to afford to lose their disability living allowance and would face the stress of not knowing if they would be able to be awarded personal independence payment. She said all disabled veterans were disabled serving this nation, and all war pensioners should be treated the same, regardless of age, and be allowed to retain the promised access to disability living allowance for life. She said the decision to remove disability living allowance from working age war pensioners, in contrast to the treatment for disabled war pensioners over 65 and modern severely disabled veterans, was a totally indefensible decision given our much proclaimed service to the nation, as frequently acknowledged by the Prime Minister only when in front of TV cameras.
A Department of Work spokesman said that no one over 65 would be reassessed for PIP, and that half of the war pensioners were, in fact, aged over 70. He said the reforms reflected the government's commitment to the principles of the Armed Forces Covenant, and it's believed that special consideration should be given to our armed forces, especially those who have been injured. He also said that the government had simplified the financial support available for injured veterans so that instead of undergoing the new PIP assessment, they would automatically receive ongoing payments to help with the additional costs associated with their injuries, which would be linked to their AFCS award.
He added, "We owe the men and women who have served this country a huge debt of gratitude and will do everything we can to help them to find work and make sure they get all the benefits they are entitled to if they are injured. This is exactly why injured members of the armed forces will automatically get the support they need through the newly introduced AFIP to help them with the additional costs associated with their injuries, and they won't have to have a separate assessment for personal independence payment." On Saturday 6th of December there will be a day-long conference in central London on war and impairment, the social consequences of disablement, as part of UK Disability History Month.
Well, thanks, Sam. That's a fascinating story. I quite understand about the 65 years and older. You know, if you're on DLA and you're over 65, then you will stay on DLA. You won't be reassessed for PRP. That applies to everybody, not just injured veterans. I'm in an interesting place because I'm 62. I'll be 63 in April, and I still haven't heard when I'm going to be assessed for PIP. But that's my personal issue. Having said that about the over 65 and that half of the war pensioners are in fact aged over 70, that affected, I think you said there was 80,000, the whole thing affects 80,000, so these are the non-modern veterans. So half of that, we're talking about 40,000 people, aren't we?
Yes. It's a lot.
It's a lot of people, it's a lot of lives.
In sort of limbo, isn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for that story, Sam. That's very interesting. Our next story is yet another access to work crisis story, which is about an advice worker who could lose her job over what is described as a ridiculous ruling. A deaf advice worker could lose her job because of a ridiculous ruling by Access to Work advisors who rejected her application because they claimed the interpreters who helped her communicate with clients were doing the work for her. Lottie Powell started working in September as a direct payments advisor with the Fed Centre for Independent Living in Brighton. She needs full-time support from British Sign Language interpreters to allow her to communicate with disabled clients and also interact with colleagues in the office. Although she was given funding for the first month of her new job by Access to Work, that has now run out.
Powell, who received full-time Access to Work support in her previous job in the NHS, was told by letter on 13th of November that her application for Access to Work funding in her new job had been turned down because support is provided to help the customer to do their job. The support workers should not be doing the work of or replacing the disabled person. Powell said she was shocked by the letter and at such an arbitrary decision. She said, "They are basically saying the interpreter is replacing my role, but they are not. I use interpreters for communication so I can access background conversations in the office so colleagues can understand what I am saying. How are interpreters doing my role if they are facilitating my communication? My interpreters will proofread my emails, but they do not change the content. They just check that they are readable so I am on a par with my peers." She added, "I work for a disabled people's organisation, and that is the irony. It is incredibly stressful. I am in such an uncertain position as regards to my future. I could lose my job because of this. I am not able to do my job without my interpreters.
Geraldine Desmolin, the Fed's chief officer, said, Lottie is very good at her job and we don't want to lose her. She's a fantastic team member and we are very happy to have her. All she has had is a letter from Access to Work saying that they are not going to pay for her support because it is the interpreters who are doing the work. They haven't even been here to see her and talk to her. It's ridiculous. I'm just gobsmacked. If she doesn't have any interpreting support, she cannot do her job. But she said the Fed would not be able to afford to pay for the communications support that PAL needs if Access to Work withdrew its funding. So far, the Department for Work and Pensions has failed to comment on her case. Now, Sam, I don't know about you, but this sounds almost sort of like Kafka, doesn't it? You know, it's the. I've heard some people say, "Oh, well, you're not. If you've got a wheelchair, then you're not disabled anymore." You know, because you're able to get around, so you're not disabled anymore. If you've got crutches, you know, you're not disabled anymore. You shouldn't have. It's just absolutely bonkers, isn't it?
I had a similar problem in school with some of the teachers. They just used to randomly say, instead of having your support today, I want you to do it on your own. Just, I don't know, and when I work with somebody, I communicate with them. I don't just sit there and go, "How are you doing?
Yeah.
Oh, that looks good. I should get a B out of that," you know. It's like on those days, I would significantly slow down.
Yes, of course.
Because I'm having to change my routine. So a similar sort of thing when somebody was off, when people change who's supporting me, is that I almost have to start again, because if somebody's covering for them, I have to spend some of my time
getting them up to
speed, knowing about them, which affects my work again. And of course, then you get the cover person going, "Oh, I am sorry," and it's like, I don't have time for apologies.
Yes, life is carrying on. Get it? Yes, absolutely. Anyway, I think they're fairly close to us in Brighton. It's not far up the road. It seems absolutely ludicrous to say that, and a basic misunderstanding about disability and care.
Particularly as she works for a disabled organisation who are handing support out to other people in different ways.
Yeah, but in a way it wouldn't matter who she works. It shouldn't matter who she works for.
No, but I'm just saying it's surprising.
It is surprising. Yeah. Well, I don't think anything would surprise me about the DWP. They seem to live on a different planet at times. Some of them do marvellous work, but others do very strange things. Now, I think we've got yet another. It's becoming the Access to Work crisis show.
Yes.
Yet another story. This is about a planning expert who tells the Tories about nonsense rules. So you've got this story, Sam, I believe.
A disabled planning consultant has described how he is only able to claim vital support from the government's Access to Work scheme for every 1 out of every 2 years because of nonsense cost-cutting rules introduced by the coalition. Philip Barton raised his concerns about the rules at their impact on disabled people with high support needs who can work part-time at an annual conference organised by the Conservative Disability Group. But his comments were made after the departure of both the Work and Pension Secretary Ian Duncan Smith and the Disabled People's Minister Mark Harper, who both spoke at the 5th Annual Disability Colloquium. How convenient that they left.
Yes. Barton Philip Barton has been receiving access to work support since 2006, but he eventually had to resign his full-time job with the planning inspectorate because the stress of not having the correct support due to wrangling between the inspectorate and access to work caused him to develop hypertension and diabetes. Now he claims employment and support allowance, and although he is placed in the support group for those disabled people with the highest support needs, he has been working up to 16 hours a week through the permitted work rules as a self-employed planning consultant. But because of rules introduced by the coalition, he is only able to claim access to work support for 12 months at a time, and then has to wait a full year before claiming it again. This meant that he had access to work support in 2012-13, but had it removed in 2013-14, had it reinstated this year, but will have it removed again for a year in April 2015. Have you got more on this story, Sam?
Barton, who is not a member of the Conservative Party, told the Disability Colloquium event, "Access to Work was a fantastic programme, but since 2010, the rules have been changing. If you are on ESA, the law says that you are allowed to work up to 16 hours a week on an indefinite basis as long as you are in the support group."
Well, again, this is almost Kafkaesque, isn't it? You know, you're allowed it for 1 year, and then you can't claim it for a year. What's that all about? It's bonkers.
I can see, because if you just look at the numbers, that makes sense. But human beings, as you look at how it affects people, that doesn't work for people, does it?
Well, in fact, it does. It's a contrary thing. You know, if he starts doing work for 1 year,
if he starts doing well in 1 year, and then you have to go, to go backwards the next year.
The carpet's pulled out from underneath him. It's absolutely mad, absolutely mad. But you know,
just illogical the way it works.
Well, it's perverse and pernicious is my reading of that. Now, we've got the story here. This is about disabled children face exclusion in both England and Wales. And just a reminder that all our stories come from John Pring, the wonderful John Pring, and the wonderful Disability News Service, which is our news agency for our Lewes show. So separate reports by the Children's Commissioner for Wales and England have highlighted the inequalities still faced by disabled children.
A report by the Children's Commissioner for England on the rights of disabled children and young people says that they feel society still holds negative views about them, while there are major obstacles and barriers that prevent them enjoying their rights under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And a report by the Children's Commissioner for Wales into the accessibility of secondary schools for wheelchair users has uncovered inadequacies in the system intended to increase access. The report on England, They Still Need to Listen More, I should say that is the title, reveals that, just like many disabled adults, disabled young people are concerned and anxious about government cuts and reforms to their benefits and services. And again, like many disabled adults, they feel the media often portrays negative images of disabled people and often linked disability with benefit dependency.
We also report distressing accounts of bullying happening to them and their disabled peers, with one telling a researcher, "Bullying is not dealt with or taken seriously. The school turned round and told me to deal with it myself." Another says, "I can switch off my hearing aid so I don't have to listen to what others are saying about me." The report also questions the adequacy of child protection services for disabled children, problems with access to communication aids, and the lack of support in education. One young person said The lifts don't work. Space in classrooms is too small, and I cannot get around the dinner hall or move around the corridors.
The research was carried out by 4 disabled young researchers who spoke to 34 disabled children and young people about their realization of their rights under United Nations Convention for Rights with People with Disabilities. The report concludes, those involved in the research consider there is no serious and certainly no comprehensive plan for the real and meaningful inclusion of disabled children in all aspects of the society in which they are growing up. Among the report's recommendations are for a new cross-government group that would draw up a strategy to change public attitudes to disabled people and reduce negative stereotypes, for more to be done to tackle disability hate crime and abuse, for better training and support for teachers, and for extra support in accessing jobs. The Children's Commissioner, Dr. Maggie Atkinson, said it was unacceptable that such issues still had to be raised, but she promised that the views of disabled children and young people would inform and shape any submission she made to UN committees on the rights of persons with disabilities.
Well, let's hope she does that, Sam. There's a couple of issues there that we're actually concerned with at the Oyster Project. The bullying thing, we've got the AWARE project, which looks at disability hate crime and helping to counter that, and also our visibility program, sort of promoting the positive contribution that disabled people make to the community. Our next story is about government funding and Crossrail and the campaign success. This is about every rail station on the major new Crossrail project will now be step-free.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! Following a successful 2-year campaign by disabled and older people. Don't get too excited, Sam, because if you go to, I think it was King's Cross, or was it St Pancras, the lift access there was atrocious. It was 2 lifts to go up 3 floors. No signage, no room to get in there. There were 2 of us in wheelchairs who couldn't get in the lifts.
It's getting better. It's not perfect, but it's getting better in a lot of areas.
Anyway, Transport for London have already announced in September that Crossrail would be step-free from street level to the train at every one of its London stations from the day it opens in 2019. But the Department for Transport has now announced a further £14 million funding to ensure that the 3 remaining inaccessible stations outside London, that's Langley, Taplow and Ivor, will now also be step-free.
The announcement is another success for Transport for All, the user-led accessible transport charity that had been campaigning to pursue Crossrail and a Transport for London subsidiary to make every one of its stations accessible. The Crossrail route will serve 40 stations connecting Reading and Heathrow Airport in the west to Sheffield and Abbey Wood in the east, and will be fully operational in 2019. Shame it takes that long, really. But campaigners were furious when it emerged that 7 stations, which are 7 Kings, Maryland, Manor Park, Hanwell, Ivor, Taplow and Langley, would not be completely step-free. Transport for London and London's Conservative Mayor Boris Johnson announced in September that they had secured funding to install step-free access at the 4 stations 7 Kings, Maryland, Manor Park and Hanwell. And this week, the Liberal Democrat Transport Minister Baroness Kramer announced government funding for the 3 stations outside London.
Liana Etkin, TFA's campaigns and outreach coordinator, said, This fantastic news means that disabled and older people will be able to use Crossrail with the same freedom and independence as everyone else. Making stations step-free benefits everyone, from people with luggage or shopping to parents with buggies. She says support for the campaign had been truly inspiring, with campaigners writing to their MPs, attending protests and raising the issue with their local councils.
She added, hopefully, Departments for Transport's decision represents a line in the sand so that never again can a new rail line be planned that is out of bound for disabled and older people. Baroness Kramer said she was delighted to confirm the funding of these important accessibility improvements. She added, it is only right that everyone should be able to enjoy huge benefits that Crossrail will bring.
Indeed, and I think one of the problems with talking about making everywhere accessible for disabled people is highlighted in this article. It's actually making it accessible for everybody. It's just
makes it easier for everybody.
Yeah, I don't want special toilets for disabled people. I would just want every toilet accessible for everybody.
Exactly.
You know, and the same with railway stations.
At certain times of the year, I think it'll make sense as well. Like, you see parents come back with a whole load of shopping, say, for Christmas, and it'd be a whole lot easier to carry that shopping on the back of the chair without steps.
Yes, absolutely. And also, you know, coming back from holiday with all the luggage, and people use wheels other than disabled people.
And lots of luggage is on wheels.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, a great story and a great result there. Now we've gone from a positive story. We're going back to the Department for Work and Pensions.
It's all negative.
Yeah, so this is about the potentially dangerous, what's described as potentially dangerous ESA letters, and the fact that the DWP has not made any apology for them. You know, I think you've got this story, Sam.
Disabled benefit claimants have complained after being targeted by government letters telling them to attend short-notice work-focused interviews, but failing to mention that attendance was voluntary. Whoops.
Whoops indeed.
Research by Disabled People Against Cuts has found that employment and support allowance claimants from across the country have been receiving the letters which say that interviews will discuss the possibility of going into paid work, training for work, or looking for work in the future.
Many disabled people have been sent the information by the Department for Work and Pensions, even though they have been placed in the support group. That's for ESA claimants who've been assessed as too ill or disabled to carry out work-related activity. One claimant told DPAC, that's the Disabled People Against Cuts organisation, I can't cope with any more stress. I can't do it. Not on top of the constant pain I'm in and all these high-level opioids. It's all just an accident waiting to happen. When will the stress and worry end? I don't feel very supported. I feel lost, lonely and very scared indeed.
Another claimant says, I have had a letter asking me to attend a work-focused interview and I am in the support group. I rang them to cancel and they have tried to bully me into going to the interview. I explained I am too ill, but they still kept on. Disabled People Against Cuts says in the report into the potentially dangerous DWP tactic that it is particularly shameful that the contact letters that we have seen do not inform people of their rights to decline the work-focused interview, while some of the letters are given to claimants at very short notice before an appointment. It adds, we conclude that this is nothing more but harassment of claimants by job centres, which risks causing serious harm to claimants, especially those with severe mental health impairments.
Meanwhile, a union has warned that nearly 2,000 ESA claimants from the Birmingham area, all waiting to be assessed for their fitness to work and eligibility for ESA, are also being invited to attend DWP workforce-focused interviews. The PCS union, which represents DWP staff, says it believes the interviews are being held to force at least 10% of the claimants off benefits. Again, the letter fails to explain that attendance is voluntary. The union says DWP staff have been told by managers to keep it to themselves that claimants do not have to attend the interviews. One manager was even overheard saying that the way to deal with these claimants is to hassle them off benefits.
Andrew Lloyd, Midlands Regional Secretary for PCS, said the letter was outrageous and he accused DWP of duping ESA claimants. A DWP spokesman said the letters investigated by Disabled People Against Cuts and those uncovered by PCS had been sent out to ESA claimants so we can support them to take work if they feel able to.
She said, using the skills and experience of our work coaches, we have received a number of positive responses from claimants who have welcomed the opportunity to speak to a work coach about the help and support that is available. Claimants are attending interviews purely on a voluntary basis, and we have not invited customers where this would be inappropriate. But she said the interviews were a short-term activity and there were no current plans to extend further this work. She said the letters make no mention of the interviews being mandatory, and it has never been our intention to suggest they were. She also added, we are committed to helping disabled people and those with health conditions to feel their ambition to work. Work is almost always good for health, and most disabled people can and want to work, provided they have the right support. There's a few assertions in there, by not saying that it's no mention of the interviews being mandatory is not the same as saying it's voluntary.
No, because if it's not in there not being mandatory, people will assume that they have to go unless otherwise specified.
Yeah, and I think that's a sort of double think. This is double think speak. The other thing, I think, we are committed to helping disabled people and all those with health conditions to fulfill their ambition. That sort of PR speak. Work is almost always good for health. Well, possibly, but it's not if it makes you ill.
Depends what work it is, I suppose.
Work that makes you ill isn't good for your health.
Exactly.
And most disabled people can and want to work. Well, I think you probably find if they can and want to work, and they're probably not disabled. Part of disability is the inability to carry out work in the way that perhaps people might have done when they weren't disabled, if they've become disabled.
A lot of these people go to these organisations to help with access, not for motivation.
Yeah. And she also says, provided they have the right support, and that's the real clue with the access to work.
That's what your job is.
Yeah. It's all a bit dodgy, isn't it? Yeah, dodgy thinking. We have a different system here at the Oyster Project charity. We encourage people into self-employment and support them in that, and that's very successful. Sometimes it might feel like self-unemployment, but that's another story. Thank you, Sam, for those stories and working your way through those as ever. All the stories are from Disability News Service, the agency run by John Pring, and we thank him for that. It's goodbye from me, John Russell.
And it's goodbye from me, Sam Sinclair.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.